What's up, guys? So today we're going to have a discussion about season 2 of Making a Murder, and this is going to kind of be in a structure of kind of a question and answer format. And I haven't personally actually seen season 1 or 2, so I will be the one asking the questions, and you will be the one answering them and kind of going over the evidence of the trial, and mostly presented in season 2.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about season 1 because sometimes it goes with some of the new evidence presented in season 2. We have to take into account everything that happened in season 1 plus everything that happened in season 2. Basically, season 2 kind of takes us through the trial process and the court systems of both Steven Avery and Brenden Dassy trying to get their convictions overturned, and it mainly focuses on the lawyers. Majority of season 2 is spent focusing on Steven Avery's new lawyer, Kathleen Zellner, who truly believes that he is innocent, and kind of her process for proving his innocence. What I like about Kathleen Zellner is she's not looking to just get Steven Avery off the hook based off of a technicality. She's trying to figure out who did it. And the thing that makes this interesting is...
Like who actually did it instead of, what's his name, Steven Avery?
Yeah, so most of the time, lawyers who are trying to get an appeal overturned are just looking for one or two small things that can get their client off the hook, technicalities. But she's not looking for that. She's genuinely trying to figure out who the killer really is, and she thinks once she figures that out, then everything else will obviously fall into place. So her whole philosophy is you can't just prove that somebody didn't do it without first figuring out who did. So she's kind of...
Because then, if you, prove their innocence and then, that doesn't necessarily find who actually did it. That just proves their innocence.
Well, I think she's saying it doesn't even necessarily prove they're innocent. It just proves that we didn't have enough information to tell whether they were innocent or not. But
or not enough information to tell that he was guilty?
Right.
Oh.
So I think she really does care about the families. She doesn't just care about Steven. And she only took the case on because she truly believes he's innocent. So she's doing it pro bono.
Okay.
So she actually truly believes in him. And she says...
Wait, so she's not getting paid?
Right.
Wow.
And she even says, she goes, nope, Teresa Hallbach's family has nothing to worry about because if Steven really did do this, then I will fail. I really like her as a attorney, and I think she's really in it for the right reasons and really trying to figure out the answer. Okay, the other thing that I really like about Kathleen is she's really upfront with Steven, and she expects Steven to cooperate and do all the testing. And I don't think someone who really thought that their client could be guilty would do that. They wouldn't want to do additional testing if they thought there was a chance that it could prove even more that they were guilty. So she's doing all the testing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Risking that, that it could come back that it is him. And if it leads her in that direction, then she will admit that it was Steven. So I really like Kathleen Zellner. And then the documentary spends some time following Brenden Dassy's case as well. The lawyers are working more on defending coerced confessions because the only thing they have on Brenden Dassy is his confession. They literally have no evidence against him at all. They have one piece of evidence against him, and it's his confession.
I think that was because I saw a couple scenes in passing, where I think it was him and the cop was like, "You did this, didn't you?" And he was just basically was telling them what they wanted to hear.
Yep.
Kind of, or at least it seemed that way.
Yeah, so his lawyers are kind of trying to fight this coerced confession battle all the way up through the courts. And there's nothing else that they can do. They can't retest any evidence. They can't go back and look for more evidence because there is no evidence against him. All they have is the confession. So that was kind of interesting to see the two different types of processes that they have to go through.
So what is the most convincing piece of evidence presented in season 2 that supports Steven Avery?
Okay, so there's a lot of new evidence that Kathleen Zellner uncovers, and there's a lot of discrepancies in the evidence presented in season 1 that we learn is inaccurate. I think the most convincing thing that Kathleen Zellner looks further into is, and this is just in my opinion, it's not forensic evidence, but it's the spotting of the car. One of the most condemning things that we've discovered in season 1 is that Teresa Halbach's car was found on Steven Avery's property. But come to find out in season 2, we have an eyewitness who says that he actually spotted the car off the side of the road closer to Scott Taddock's trailer, not anywhere near Steven Avery's trailer.
So I wonder why that didn't come up in season 1. Seems pretty important.
Yeah, so this eyewitness didn't come forward till after season 1.
Oh.
Well, he did. Here's what's interesting. So this eyewitness saw missing person posters everywhere of Teresa Halbach, and he saw a picture. He was driving down the road. I think he was going to some little mini mart or gas station or something, and he spotted this car off the side of the road that was a RAV4. And he went into the store, and as he was going into the store, he saw the missing persons poster of Teresa and a picture of her car on the poster as well. And he walks into the store, so happens to see a policeman, and says, "Hey, that car you're looking for that missing person is right down the road down there." And so he gives that information to the policeman.
And the policeman didn't report that either?
So here's the interesting thing. This eyewitness doesn't realize it until season 1 of Making a Murderer comes out. And
weird.
Getting up on the stand is this same policeman that he ran into at the store, and it's Colburn. And the interesting thing about Officer Colburn is that he was involved in Steven Avery's initial arrest that he was later found innocent of and released because of DNA testing. So he is directly involved and has a huge conflict of interest in the Steven Avery case because he was one of the original officers who withheld information in the original case against Steven Avery to get him out of jail. Steven Avery was in jail for a much longer period of time because Officer Colburn had found new evidence that would acquit him and never presented it. So Colburn...
He was the officer that the dude told about the car?
Yes, the same exact officer. And here's the interesting piece. In season 1, we see a call that Officer Colburn makes. He calls in the license plate number of Teresa Halbach's car 2 days before her car is found. And this is the exact same day that this eyewitness reported to him that he had seen the car up the road.
Wait, he called 2 days before?
Yeah, so Officer Colburn calls in Teresa Halbach's license plate number 2 days prior to the car actually being found. And that was a big thing in season 1 that the defense was questioning him. How did you know, what the license plate number was? Why did you call in this car and know the year of the car, which was information that hadn't been released? How did he know that? And why did he call it in 2 days before the car was found?
Yeah.
Just so happens to be the same day the eyewitness told him where the car was. So I think that was a pretty compelling piece of evidence that Teresa Halbach's car actually did leave Steven Avery's house. The car left and was off the side of the road closer to Scott Taddock's trailer. The other interesting thing is Teresa Halbach got a phone call on her cell phone before the murder took place, before the time of the murder, supposed time.
Because she answered it.
I'm actually not sure if they answered it, but the call did ping one of the cell phone towers that was not near Steven Avery's house. It was the wrong cell phone tower, indicating that she had left. Huh. And they had originally blown this off as, sometimes the cell phone towers are a little finicky like that. But they did some testing. Kathleen Zellner did some testing and noticed that every single call made to Teresa Halbach, where she was located at the time, was the correct cell phone tower. So the cell phone tower had consistently been correct. And the cell phone tower... Until that last one. Until if you place the car where the eyewitness said it was, then it would have been the correct cell phone tower. So both the cell phone tower ping and the eyewitness spotting of the car indicate that she did leave Steven Avery's house. So I think that was the most compelling piece of evidence for me.
Well, but couldn't you say that, he took her car off and drove it down the street or whatever?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that he drove it down the street and then 2 days later, moved it again that is possible to say. But it's interesting that Officer Colburn doesn't immediately report discovering it. Like, why didn't the police officer...
Yeah, when that guy told him about it.
Yeah, he doesn't report discovering it. He holds off for 2 days, and then we find it on the Avery property. So you would think the policeman would just,
do it right away.
Do it right away.
Because it's missing.
It's missing.
And she's missing,
And
right?
she's missing, yeah. So it's almost like Officer Colburn is suspecting Steven Avery and wants it to be found on Steven Avery property. The other thing that I think is just in general really convincing for Steven Avery is that his story has consistently never changed. It's been several years now, and his story has never once changed, ever.
That's his story, and he's sticking to it.
Yeah,
basically.
And it's never really contradicted the evidence. I mean, you can explain it all away. Some of the explanations are far-fetched, but you can explain it away. And so his story has consistently never changed, which I think is interesting because usually, if you're a murderer, people keep finding things and you have to keep kind of changing your story when they find things. And his story has never changed despite the evidence they presented in front of him. The other really convincing piece of evidence that they bring up is her day planner. She had her day planner with her that day. And with the times that she had taken phone calls from people and added things to her day planner, she wouldn't have had time to go back home and drop off her day planner.
She seems like a really organized person to just jot down like her phone calls and stuff.
Yeah, she was, because she was a photographer, and so she had to jot down all her appointments as people called her. So people would call her, and she'd have to jot things down. So the other interesting thing is her ex-boyfriend is the one with the day planner. How did he have that day planner? She supposedly had the day planner the day she went missing. How did he get that day planner?
How did they know that she had it with her?
I think we assume she had it with her because there were phone calls made to her the day she died to make appointments with her. And those appointments were written in the day planner. So if those appointments were written in the day planner and the people called her to make those appointments that day, then we can assume that she must have had it with her that day.
So shouldn't the ex be a suspect in that case?
Yeah, the ex definitely should be a suspect. And I think that's one of the things that they really overlooked. They had so much
So he's not actually a suspect?
No. Well, once they found all the blood evidence on Steven Avery and the bones and the bullet, they
just didn't even consider
They
it?
just didn't even look into anyone else. That's because
weird.
There was so much resounding evidence against Steven Avery.
Oh.
So I think the other piece of evidence that's interesting is just all the missing blood. We have this bullet that she was supposedly shot in the head with in the garage with 0 blood. Apparently, she was chained up to the bed and raped. No blood or any DNA evidence of her in the house at all. None. If she was shot and killed or stabbed and killed or, hit, which they're saying she was shot, where's all the blood? There's literally no blood anywhere except for a little bit in the back of her RAV4. But there's no blood of hers anywhere on the Avery property except for on that bullet.
Where did they find the bullet at?
They found the bullet in the Avery's garage.
Huh.
So they're saying she was shot in the garage.
There's no bullet holes or anything around there?
There's tons of bullet holes. They're hunters. So there's bullets everywhere. There's bullet holes and bullets everywhere.
So there's no way to know, really.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing, too...
You'd think they would find more blood because, it splatters when you get shot, so...
All the evidence points to her being murdered elsewhere. There's no blood evidence anywhere on the Avery property except for a tiny bit on this bullet, which the interesting thing about the bullet is there's no bone fragments in the bullet. It's almost nearly impossible to shoot somebody in the head, they were saying in season 2, and not
skull fragments
without getting bone fragments. In fact, it's also very unlikely that the bullet would exit the head. Like, it's very unlikely that the bullet would pass all the way through the head. And if it did pass through the head, it's very, very unlikely, if not impossible, that it wouldn't have bone fragments. This bullet had no bone fragments. And in fact, the bullet had fragments of wood lodged into it, like all the other bullets in the garage. It looked the same as all the other bullets in the garage with the wood fragments in it.
So maybe somebody like put her blood on a bullet or something?
I guess blood, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Blood was not found on the bullet, but her DNA was found on the bullet.
Oh.
With a waxy substance. So the theory is that maybe they took her chapstick and rubbed it on the bullet, because her chapstick is one of the things that they took out of her house to use as for DNA comparison.
I feel like they would know that it's chapstick, though.
They saw a waxy substance. They don't know what it is. But
That's
there's
weird.
a waxy substance on the bullet that the other bullets don't have.
Huh.
But it is similar to the other bullets in that it has wood fragments in it. So that part was interesting as well.
So overall, what's the most convincing evidence against Steven Avery, not just in season 2?
So right now, I think the most convincing thing against him is just the amount of planted evidence. Like, in order for it to not be him, they would have had to have planted a lot of evidence. And I find it kind of far-fetched to say that the police not only would plant evidence, but would plant that much evidence. We've got her key found in his house. We've got his DNA on the hood latch of the car. We've got his blood in her car. We've got DNA on the bullet. We've got her bone fragments in the fire pit. We've got... that's just a lot of planted evidence. Like, would they really go to the lengths to plant that much evidence? And then the car being planted there as well. Like, if it wasn't him, that's quite a bit of planting of evidence to believe.
Very intricate plan.
Yeah, very, very intricate, which I think can be explained away, but it's a little bit far-fetched. The other thing that they did not address in the documentary, and I wish they had addressed, is Steven Avery's ex-girlfriend, the girlfriend that he was with in season 1, Jody. In season 1, he has a girlfriend named Jody, and she is 100% behind him and supportive, and they interview her extensively. And in all her interviews, she is 100% trying to help get him, acquitted. And now she has come out with this video shortly after season 1 was released saying she thinks he committed the murder. So...
It's kind of a quick 180.
A quick 180. She says she felt pressured when they were making the documentary to be on his side, and that she thinks he did it, and that he's violent, and that he is not a good person. And I really wish that Kathleen Zellner, I don't know if she did this or not, but I wish they would have shown her exploring that, because ex-girlfriends usually have a lot of information and they don't share it until after they become an ex. Like, it's ex-girlfriends and ex-boyfriends who have a lot of information that they don't share up front. But then the breakups are what create new evidence in the case. And nobody went and interviewed her, from what I've seen, to talk to her about anything that Steven Avery might have told her while they were together. And she now believes that he is the murderer. So that's really, really compelling evidence against Steven Avery.
Yeah.
Also, in addition to the amount of planted evidence, like, even if the police were against him, would they need to plant that much? Couldn't they just plant blood and call that good? Couldn't they just plant?
Maybe they just decided, hey, we better go all in or get out or whatever, But then that ended up being their downfall, was they went too much in instead of just a little bit, because now it's seeming like it's overkill.
Yeah. I also find it hard to believe that many policemen would all be corrupt and in it together. Like, I can believe that maybe 1 or 2 policemen would say, hey, we need to get this guy. But for that many policemen who are all going there
just to get one guy,
the only way I can make sense of it is that the killer planted some evidence which led the police to believe it was Steven Avery. And then the police
added some more,
genuinely believing that it was Steven Avery and that they didn't have enough evidence, planted some more in order to really in their minds, do the right thing and get him convicted. Because oftentimes police officers do know in their own hearts and minds who the killer is, but they don't have the evidence to prove it. So the only way I can make sense of it is the killers are planting evidence, and then also the police are believing it is Steven Avery because of that planted evidence. And so they are also...
They just put
more on top of it. But what's really interesting to me is if you are a murderer, like if Steven Avery is actually the murderer, why would he call? One of the things that they bring up is the fact that he calls her personal cell phone instead of calling the company, which is later explained away by the fact that she was doing a specific, he was doing something for him that wasn't through the company. But like, why would you call that person and then murder them right after? You know it's going to be in the phone records. She gives him some sort of brochure or pamphlet, and he brings it in the house. Why would you bring evidence that you were talking to her into your house?
Maybe he's not that smart.
Yeah, I mean, that could be explained away too, but it just seems like, he's smart enough to clean up all the blood and all the, DNA, but he's not smart enough to
He's smart enough to conceal some evidence, but leave other evidence just wide open.
Yeah, so that also doesn't quite make sense.
So moving on, what is the most convincing evidence in support of Brenden Dassy?
So I think Brenden Dassy's most convincing evidence is his own confession. Like, his own confession, in my opinion, proves that he is innocent, which is kind of interesting to say that. But you can completely tell. I think Brenden Dassy is the most tragic story I've ever heard, ever. In season 2, we do learn, spoiler alert, that he goes all the way through the whole system, all the way through, and he does not make it out of jail. Like, he's stuck there now. The only way he can really get out is if Steven Avery is acquitted, and therefore would acquit him. But it's just really tragic because it's so obvious in his confession tapes that he's just trying to answer correctly, like a student, like a mentally handicapped student. I'm coming in, I need a specific answer from you, Brenden, and you're not giving it to me. And you can tell he's sitting there thinking, what could the right answer be? And he lists all these answers. He goes through, what happened to her head, Brenden? We cut her hair. No, Brenden, that's not what happened. We know what happened to her. What happened to her head, Brenden? And he's guessing all these answers until he gets to the one they want to hear. And many times he doesn't get to the one that they want to hear. And so they just come out and say, well, I'm just going to come out and say it. Who shot her in the head? And then he goes, he did. Brenden doesn't know the answers. And they keep asking him all these questions. And
does he say he did, or does he say Steven did it?
He says he did. He doesn't say Steven.
So he doesn't even say a specific name?
He just keeps answering yes or no questions until they get the answer they want to hear. And it's very, very obvious to me, especially as a teacher. That's exactly what my students do when they don't understand something. And I just keep asking them over and over, and I can tell they don't understand because they're just guessing one answer after another until they hit the right one. And that's exactly what he's doing in these confession tapes. So it's very, very apparent that his confession is fake.
Almost as if he doesn't even know what they're talking about. He's just like, okay, these guys just want me to answer these correctly so I can
leave.
Out. Yeah, so I can leave. Then it's like, oh, hey, I'm in jail now. So, okay, what is the most convincing evidence against Brenden?
In my opinion, there is no evidence against Brenden. His confession, in my opinion, is support that he didn't do it. His confession, in my mind, proves that he had nothing to do with it, because if he had, he would have been able to answer those questions clearly. And he would have been, the second they came up with some evidence against him, he would have zigged and zagged. But you could clearly tell he wasn't trying to change stories. He was just trying to answer them and give them the correct answer. So
there's no evidence that he was there on the property? Well, I guess.
There is evidence. There. Yeah, he was home. I think he was the only one who was home, and the police needed him to give some sort of eyewitness statement as to what Steven Avery did, which is why they were pressuring him so much, because he was the only one who could have possibly been an eyewitness. But he didn't see anything, but they really needed him to give the answers that they wanted to hear, because the police, in my opinion, so strongly believed that it was Steven Avery that they felt like they were doing the right thing by planting evidence and getting Brenden to say he did it, even though he likely did not. So I think
they don't really care if Brenden goes down with him as long as Steven goes down.
I do not know how the courts watched those tapes and still believed that confession. It baffles me. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to watch those confessions and to clearly see that he was making things up.
Well, as far as I remember that scene, he doesn't even really outright say that he had a hand in the murder, does he? Or am I just misremembering?
Well, he keeps answering questions, and they keep asking him questions like, what did you see in the fire? And he says her toes. And like,
what?
He does actually implicate himself in the murder quite a bit, actually, even admitting he was involved in the rape, which is funny because it's not funny in a literal sense,
obviously,
but like, it's interesting because like, we can't prove there was a rape. There's no proof that there was any type of rape. I think they just had to add that in there.
Wouldn't her DNA be in like the house if there was, especially?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's this whole story about being chained up to the bed and being raped. There's no...
Where does that come from?
I think it comes from Brendan's confession. I think what the police were trying to do is find some sort of motive for Steven Avery. They had to find some motive and they couldn't find any. So,
because he doesn't really have a reason to kill her?
Exactly. So that's where the whole, interrogation of Brenden and the rape allegations come into play. So I think that they felt they needed Brenden to tell them things that would give Steven Avery a motive.
Okay, so who are the new suspects presented?
Okay, so Kathleen Zellner gives us 3 promising suspects. She says it could be Bobby Dassey, who is Brendan's older brother, who left the property right at the same time as Teresa Halbach. Now, we're saying that's assuming that you believe that Teresa Halbach left the property, because Bobby says he left and Teresa was still there. But there's other there's other accounts that say she left the property. The other brother, Brenden Dassy, says that Bobby told him that he saw her leave. So Bobby's kind of got at one end, he told somebody that she left. On the other end, he testifies that she didn't leave.
So his story is not
consistent. Yeah, if we believe the other brother. But anyway, so he leaves right around the time that Steven says Teresa left. And then Scott Toddick is driving the opposite direction and says that he sees him driving down the road. So they are each other's alibis. And then Scott Toddick is also, his trailer is right where her car is found. So that kind of ties the two of them together. As a possible suspect.
Like maybe they worked together or something?
Yeah, it could have been an accidental, like maybe one of them accidentally shot her or something, and then the other one helped get rid of the body because they were going to go hunting. Or maybe
maybe they were doing, just shooting their guns and a stray bullet hit her.
And this is just all my thinking. This wasn't in the documentary. But yeah, that's what was in the documentary. Kathleen Zellner's hypothesis was maybe Bobby followed her and waved her down and she got pulled over on the side of the road. And then from there, something happened. We don't know how Scott Toddick could be involved, but Scott Toddick gave Bobby the alibi. Also, Bobby has a bunch of really, really disturbing porn on his computer, snuff film type things, and images that almost look like dead bodies to me. So that's really suspicious. However, I still, for me personally, don't think it was Scott Toddick or Bobby Dassey because they also don't really have a motive. So to me, I think that they need to look into the ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hilligus.
Either that or maybe accidental death.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Ryan Hilligus is the most promising thing to look into, and I can't...
Because he has her planner?
he has her planner, and he doesn't have an alibi for the day she went missing. He has no alibi. And he has a motive because she was sleeping with his best friend. And after she died, he moved right into her apartment. Like with his best friend into her old apartment.
That's weird.
Yeah. So there's a lot of weird, strange things going on with him. I don't want to accuse him without any more evidence. The problem with him is nobody looked into him. So, it's possible that she made it home. She made it all the way home after leaving Steven Avery's house. She gets home. He kills her, and he goes and he knows that she had just gotten back from Steven Avery's house, takes her planner, plants the car over off the side of the road by Scott Toddick's trailer, and then he breaks into the house later, gets the blood evidence out of Steven Avery's house because Steven Avery says he was bleeding in his sink and the blood was left in the sink, and plants that blood evidence or something. And so he pins it on Steven Avery, essentially, by planting the evidence in putting the bones, maybe he went and put the bones in the fire pit after burning the body. So I think Ryan Hilligus, I don't want to accuse him, but somebody needs to look into that more because he definitely has the motive. I mean, she was sleeping with his best friend.
Were they not broken up at that time? Or?
They were. They were broken up at the time. That was
obviously it's still not a good thing to have your ex-girlfriend date your friend.
Well, and there's evidence that he wanted her back, and she kind of was rejecting him and was sleeping with with his best friend and living with him. I think I might be wrong on that bit, but that just whole the fact that wasn't even looked into, and where was he that day? He needs an alibi.
Yeah, you would think that would be an obvious thing to look into.
Yeah,
even if there's a lot of evidence against this other guy. You would think that they would look into multiple suspects regardless.
So I really think they should go down the path of looking into Ryan Hilligus. He has the motive. He doesn't have an alibi. So somebody needs to look into that. If he had her day planner, he knew where she was. He knew where she was that day and where the most logical place to go plant that evidence would be.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, and then I think the fact that Steven Avery already had beef with the police officers, they might have just helped the cause along. I definitely don't think the police were in cahoots with Ryan Hilligus, though. That's just crazy. I don't think the police would know that it was a different killer and then still say it was Steven Avery. That's just crazy to me. But, so I think Ryan Hilligus is the most suspicious.
Aside from them not investigating this guy, what was the most frustrating part of the documentary?
Oh, definitely Brenden Dassy, watching him go down and not get I really do not understand what these judges were thinking when they denied Brenden Dassy his appeals. They kept saying in the documentary when he gets to the 7th Circuit Court, which is one step below the Supreme Court, he gets all the way up to the 7th Circuit Court, and they say that they went over the tapes and the police didn't do anything wrong. The police used all the normal tactics that they're allowed to use when interrogating a suspect. And I found that extremely frustrating. They kept saying, well, the police didn't do anything wrong. What should the police have done differently? That's what they asked Brenden Dassy's lawyers. And I kept thinking during that whole part, who cares? Who cares if they did their job correctly or not? You can clearly see that the way Brenden answered the questions was not of a guilty person. So you could clearly see that the way Brenden answered the questions was him just trying to give him a right answer.
Maybe it's as if they didn't actually watch the tapes, but they read.
They did watch them.
Okay.
It's shown in the documentary, or it's stated clearly in the documentary that they did watch the videos.
They're not listening to what they saw, but what was said. They're only focusing on that.
Well, what they're focusing on is the policeman, and did the policeman do his job correctly? And if he didn't, then they can,
Oh, okay.
But I didn't like that. That was the only thing they could focus on. That makes no sense to me. It doesn't matter if he did his job within what he's allowed to do. You could clearly see that the way Brenden was interpreting the questions, he was just guessing answers to please them.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they said, oh, well, the policemen did everything they were allowed to do. So what? So what? You still have an innocent person in jail because of this. So why are you not focusing on the way in which he is answering the questions? Why are you only focusing on the way in which he is being asked? And it was explained in the documentary that we have to prove that the police officers were in the wrong in the way they interrogated him. And unfortunately, the courts found that they were within, normal procedures for how you interrogate somebody.
That kind of sucks that somebody else has to be in the wrong for you to be innocent.
Yeah. Like the policeman had to be in the wrong. Like it doesn't matter if they did their job correctly or not. Brenden misunderstood what was going on. Brenden just gave you answers that you wanted to hear. Whether you made false promises or not, it doesn't matter. That's what he thought he was supposed to do.
So he's basically like a special needs. Like, what is his deal?
So he doesn't have any mental handicaps, but he does have a very, very low IQ. And he was a 16-year-old boy. And so, you have this authority figure.
Very impressionable.
Very impressionable. This authority figure telling you that you need to give him the answers and that he knows them already, but he needs to hear what they are from you. Of course, you're going to try and sit there, and it's just like what teachers do to the students. Nope, that's a wrong answer. And the student's sitting there thinking, and he's in school. He's trying to give the policeman, he's treating the policeman like a teacher. Okay, let me keep guessing these answers until I'm right. And it's just infuriating to me that the courts don't seem to care. They are only looking at whether or not the policemen were in the right or in the wrong. And it's like, okay, the policemen weren't in the wrong, but they got a false confession out of it. And that's pretty obvious. So that was the most infuriating thing about the documentary. And now Brenden Dassy is stuck in jail for life until and unless they can prove that Steven Avery didn't do it, which sucks because I'm on the fence about Steven Avery. I'm on the fence about him. I don't completely 100% think he's innocent. So if we do find that he is guilty, then Brenden Dassy is stuck in prison. And he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that kind of sucks.
So that's really, really upsetting. So now it's like I'm hoping and praying that Steven Avery is innocent simply so that Brenden Dassy can get out of jail. I do want to say that what I am certain of is that the murder did not happen the way that the prosecution claims it happened in season 1. There's absolutely no way that the way they said it happened is what happened. So if Steven Avery did do it, it absolutely didn't happen the way that they said it happened. And so they need to go back and say, well, if it is Steven Avery, how did he do it then? Because in my mind, there's no way she was murdered on the property. No way. She had to have been murdered somewhere else. And where was that? There's no way she was burned on the property. She had to be burned somewhere else. And where was that and how? So those are things that I am certain of.
So aside from that, or are there any other things that the documentary didn't cover that you wish they had?
So I think I already talked about this, but I just wish that they had talked more about the ex-girlfriend Jody, because that would have been an important lead to follow. And it might have...
You mean in season 2?
In season
right?
2,
Yeah.
because it might have... Because in season 1, Jody is supportive of Steven the whole time. And then when season 1 is over, they break up. And now all of a sudden she thinks that he did it. So even though it would have been against Steven Avery, and I think season 2 is trying to support Steven Avery, even though it would have been against him, we needed to see that. We needed to see what she had to say. So I highly recommend you watch on YouTube what Steven Avery's ex-girlfriend Jody has to say about everything.
Oh, okay, so she did interview. They just didn't put it in the documentary. I was about to say maybe she didn't want to get interviewed, but obviously
she was interviewed, but not by the people who did this documentary. She was interviewed by somebody else in that video. But I wish Kathleen Zellner had talked to her, because Kathleen Zellner wants to find the truth. And so that also means she needs to talk to people who think Steven Avery did it, because, I mean, maybe this ex-girlfriend knows something.
Yeah, you can't just focus on people you think or who think he didn't do it when you're trying to get down to the bottom of it. All right, so what's overall, what is your final opinion?
So I would say 100% Brenden Dassy is completely innocent and needs to be released from prison. I feel it's just such a tragedy that he's lost his entire childhood and his whole life based on this false confession. As far as whether or not Steven Avery did it, I'm still on the fence with that one. I'm slightly leaning towards the fact that he didn't do it. I think they need to do more digging into Ryan Hillegas. And
that's the
ex-boyfriend of Teresa. And if they can maybe find any evidence that proves that he didn't do it, that might make me feel stronger towards Steven again. But right now, I kind of feel like I can't think that Steven did it without knowing more about Ryan Hillegas, because Ryan had a pretty strong motive. And he also had the means. He didn't have an alibi, and had her day planner, so he knew where she was that day.
And also, how did he get her day planner?
Yeah, exactly. So there's some things there that I think need to be explored. So I guess for right now, I'm going to say I think Steven Avery is innocent for now, but I think my mind could be easily changed with more evidence.
Cool. So obviously, I mean, this documentary series is like super big. It's obviously a really well done documentary. What do you think of season 2? Do you think it's better than season 1? As good? Not as good? In terms of how well done it was, I guess you could say?
I mean, it's a lot more boring than season 1 because it's all about the court systems and the appeals, which I think just inherently aren't as interesting as the actual case and the actual trial. In season 1, we get the whole trial, and we get to meet all of
less drama.
Yeah, we get to meet all the people involved, and you kind of get to discover all the evidence. But in season 2, we already know all the evidence. And so it's just kind of retesting of the evidence and then going through the appellate courts. So it's a lot more, it's not as interesting as season 1. But if you're interested in the case, I recommend watching it. If you don't have a huge interest in the case, you'll probably be bored by it. And it's really heartbreaking to watch, too, because Brenden has a lot of hopeful things happen, and you think he's supposed to get out of jail the next day, and then he doesn't. And then he's supposed to get out of jail again, and he doesn't.
Unfortunately, it's not a movie, it's real life, so
yeah,
not a happy ending.
It's not a happy ending. And
if you think he's innocent, that is.
But it's definitely interesting if you are interested in how like the court system works. And Kathleen Zellner alone, I would watch it for her because she's just an amazing lawyer, and just getting her opinion on everything's really interesting. So I guess I would recommend it if you're interested in the case.
Like I said, I hadn't seen it. I've seen bits and pieces of the first season. It's not really my cup of tea. But if you guys want more videos like this, more Netflix discussions, I've got a bunch of Netflix reviews on the channel. Go ahead and check those out if you haven't. And we have discussions occasionally on here as well. But if you want more, just let us know down in the comments and we'll do some more. Well, thanks as always for watching. And as always, take it easy.